241. Newt's visit. Plans remain unchanged. Brioni Island. Daron and the others who had returned set about dealing with the unconscious Ukrainian Ironbelly and 23 bound wizards. As for what would happen to those wizards afterwards, Eno didn't ask foolishly, and Lucius didn't volunteer an answer. Magic did its work again. Within a few hours, the island's buildings were mostly restored, the only exceptions being the dead acromantulas and the damaged plant life. No spell could bring the dead back. Once everything was settled, Lucius decisively left 10,000 galleons behind and departed the island by portkey. Less than an hour after he left, the island received 2 heavyweight visitors. Seeing the elderly man with white hair and beard and a shy smile, Eno hurried forward. "Long time no see, Mr. Newt," he called. "You should have told me sooner. I was bored in Devon." Newt glanced around, his voice edged with irritation. "This is outrageous. I never expected anyone to be so bold." Eno gave a brief account, then turned to the other older man accompanying Newt, old Flint from LAA Publishing House. "Welcome as well, Mr. Flint." "I'm sorry I was slow," Flint said. "The moment I heard the news, I contacted Newt, but I still seem to have been a step too late." Compared with their last meeting, Flint had changed. His tone and bearing were different. Where before he'd behaved like a patronizing elder being polite to a junior, now he had put aside that arrogance and was unexpectedly affable. Eno, noticing the shift, steered the conversation. "Just the fact that you and Mr. Newt arrived so quickly has been a huge help," he said. "No one can be sure they wouldn't try to cause trouble again." "I'm not leaving," Newt blurted like a child throwing a tantrum. "Once everything here is settled, we'll see who dares to cause trouble a second time. I'll stay too. We can talk about the Quidditch World Cup in 3 months, Flint added. Faced with 2 insistent elders, Eno relented. "If you're staying, we'll start building proper shelters soon." With Newt and Flint's high-profile arrival, Brioni Island entered a period of intense attention. Newt even put a public notice in several papers, stating that the Brioni Island Dragon Sanctuary was his base for research on magical creatures. Unlike the cloistered influence of the British purebloods, the Master of Magical Creatures has a worldwide reputation. The announcement made it clear the whole wizarding world was watching, and no one would dare cause trouble again. In times of peace, those who strike first usually end up facing the full force of the rules. Life on the little island settled into a peaceful rhythm. Mid-May arrived. More than 10 days had passed since the last incident. Flint left on the 7th day, and after his departure, Eno felt free to speak openly with Newt about everything, even boggarts and nightmares. It felt like last summer's relaxed holiday at the manor in that American town. By the coast, under the cool shade of trees, 2 lounge chairs sat side by side. Newt lay back, closed his eyes, and let the sea breeze wash over him. "Have you changed your mind?" he asked after a while. "Are all masters of magical creatures this sensitive?" Eno teased. Newt opened his eyes. "So you really have changed your mind?" Eno hesitated, then admitted, "I'm unsure. During the Christmas holiday, I met someone who told me things about fire." Prometheus's words had always weighed on him, the idea that the birth of a phoenix reflects the very nature of fire. "He said fire is fire," Eno continued, "and perhaps forcing fire to birth a phoenix isn't the right choice." The 2 men fell silent beneath the trees, time stretching by the minute. After a while, Newt spoke slowly. "I respect your choice. Fide's birth has already satisfied my curiosity." "Aren't you going to try to persuade me?" Eno asked, a little disappointed. Who could refuse a common phoenix, one that could be presented for all to see with great ceremony? Newt smiled wryly. "How would you want me to persuade you? If I told you to give it up, you'd resent me. If I told you to go ahead, you'd hesitate. Some decisions have to come from the person who must live with them. When someone is indecisive, advice often does more harm than good. Why don't we leave it to fate?" Eno fished a small wooden die from his pocket and rolled it between his fingers. Newt's interest was piqued. "That sounds like you. I've long heard you have a knack for divination. I'm not divining this time. I'm just rolling dice." Eno shook his head. After his talk about divination with Dumbledore at the old Black House, he had tried not to rely on signs. A diviner who depends entirely on divination is already enslaved by it. "How will it work?" Newt asked. "Simple," Eno said. 1, 2, 3 means give up. 4, 5, 6 means proceed as planned. He cleared his mind and tossed the die. It spun up and fell back down, obeying plain Muggle physics. It seems the answer is clear. Newt let out a relieved laugh. Then, according to the plan. Eno felt a wash of relief, too. It was as if a barrier of knowledge had been lifted. A dark room briefly lit by a match, then plunged back into darkness. Outwardly, nothing had changed, but the person who had seen the light had. He felt different. Not just me and Dumbledore, Newt said cheerfully. We should invite others to come with us. The thought brought an eager spark to Eno's mind. If Death Eaters showed up again, it could be an interesting fight. Newt and Dumbledore together would be formidable. Even Lord Voldemort at his height would likely think twice. 242. Hogwarts before summer vacation, late May. Eno left Briony Island, not because he wanted to, but because a letter from Hogwarts forced him to. The sender was Snape. The message was blunt and to the point, only 5 words. Return for the exam. Faced with the potions master's terse summons, Eno immediately said goodbye to Newt and gave Daron instructions to keep the spider farm running smoothly in his absence. At Hogwarts, the first thing he did was go to the potions classroom office, an apt way to mark the end of his 2.5-month vacation. Professor, thank you for giving your approval. Everything is under control, he said. You needn't tell me that, Snape replied in his usual unflappable tone. Eno had spent 3 years with the man and knew him well enough to stop talking. After a curt nod and the permission he sought, he left the office. Returning to the Slytherin common room felt like coming home. The furnishings, the atmosphere, everything was familiar. Only one thing stood out, a film mirror on a shelf that, to his surprise, showed a duel between the oafish Goyle and Ron Weasley. Slytherin and Gryffindor performing on the same stage was odd enough, but the mirror made it worse. Ron was getting thrashed, and badly. His stumbling and wailing were exaggerated to the point of being transparent fakery, which somehow made it more absurd than believable. Meanwhile, in the Gryffindor common room, George and Fred had tossed a pouch to Ron, who eagerly opened it. 1, 2, 3. No need to count, George said, raising an eyebrow. 30 sickles exactly. Your pay won't be short. Ron let out a giddy chuckle. 30 sickles, almost 2 galleons, was more money than he'd ever had at once. He stared at the bright silver coins on the table and swallowed. Fred noticed the look on his brother's face and, for the first time, felt a brief twinge of guilt over teasing him. But there was no denying how much Malfoy had paid. 10 galleons just to have Ron pretend to be beaten by Goyle for the film mirror. Fred felt the pull of twin intuition, and muttering something to George, they slipped away, leaving Ron to count his spoils with childlike satisfaction. Knowing the amount was one thing, handling the coins himself was another entirely. Harry, watching, couldn't help but prod. I don't think it's that simple, Ron. Think, what exactly happened? The scarred boy shrugged. They wouldn't go too far, he said. It's a prank. George and Fred wouldn't cross the line. Money was practically impossible to refuse, and the work was ridiculous but painless. Fall down for a sickle, cry a little for 5 nuts. And on top of that, the mirror would record it for everyone to see. Ron was proud that he could earn his keep with his own performance, however foolish the task. Who else was there? Harry asked, still suspicious. Malfoy was there, Ron said offhandedly. Of course he was. Would the twins have gone that big otherwise? I know they made a profit. Filming it for the mirror was part of the plan. But it doesn't matter. I got paid. Hearing that, Harry let it drop. He'd wanted to object, to warn Ron about being used, but the boy's excitement and obvious intent to spend the money on a new broom before summer shut him up. Ron had only a quarter of an hour to perform, and the reward made it worth the humiliation. A fleeting desire struck Harry then, a childish thought that one day he too might miss a boy who wasn't there. For now, that would have to wait. Eno had been gone for over 2 months. If Ron ever wanted his own film mirror, he'd have to find Eno when he returned. Achoo! A sharp sneeze echoed through the library. Eno rubbed at his nose and gave Madame Pince an apologetic smile. After watching Ron's little performance in the common room, he had come to the library to study. With final exams 2 weeks away, his practical skills were secure, but theory needed attention. Poor results wouldn't just reflect on him. Rumors would spread, professors would compare notes, and Snape's reputation could be dragged into it. He also intended to warn Lena that the countdown to her enforced separation had begun. The Hogwarts library would close over summer, and if the sanctuary followed previous patterns, it would open 2 fantasy worlds again. Lena, the White Witch, had been the one besides Professor Hans who had helped him more than anyone. She shouldn't be kept like a pet. Within the limits of the rules they were bound by, he intended to give her as much freedom as possible, whether in Middle-earth or on the Arad continent. He stayed in the library until 7. As the stacks thinned, he drifted past the restricted section. A small blue acromantula weaved up his sleeve and into the folds of his robes with practiced stealth. "It's nearly exam time," Madame Pince said at his elbow, voice brittle with disapproval. "And you don't borrow any books? In a week you won't be able to check anything out at all." Eno gave a small shake of his arm to settle the spider and smiled. "Thank you, but I have another means," he replied. Lena had spent an entire school year in the restricted section. With that accumulation of knowledge at his disposal, why would he need to borrow more tomes? He flicked through a slim, well-thumbed manual and let his eyes skim an entry for amusement. The Horklump. British Ministry of Magic, Classification X. Origin and distribution, native to Scandinavia, now common across Northern Europe. Appearance, a pink, bristly, mushroom-like creature, fleshy and bulbous, covered with scattered, stiff black bristles. Habits, instead of roots, the Horklump extends powerful tentacles underground to seek its preferred food, earthworms. Eno closed the book with a contented sigh. Whether consulting old volumes or the living memory of those bound by magic to the restricted section, he had what he needed. He tucked the spider deeper into his sleeve, nodded once toward Madame Pince, and left the library to begin the practical preparations for exams, and privately to plan how best to give Lena the freedom she deserved before summer began. 243. It really became a nightmare. Early June in the Scottish Highlands brought a heat wave, and Hogwarts had the same restless hum as final exams approached. The tension was thickest among 5th and 7th years. These tests weren't only about marks, they helped decide the shape of a life. Slytherin, however, looked almost untouched. More than 80% of its pupils already had their futures mapped out before they were born. OWLs and NWTs, for many of them, were formalities, barriers designed for ordinary folk. Even Goyle would inherit the family business. For some, school was more like an extended holiday with a chance to nitpick the castle kitchens. Each house presented its own scene. In the Slytherin dungeons, the dominant color was a brooding emerald, candlelight flickering over cold stone. In one small shared room, the only sounds were the rustle of pages and the scratch of quills. A small pile of handwritten books sat on the table, their titles the kind that made people avert their eyes. Shred Your Brains, One Finger Bruise Potion, 12 Uses for Eyeballs, Techniques of the Killing Curse. Rena had cleared away most of the worst, but a few remained. "Eno, I'm set on Middle-earth," Rena said in a cool, clear voice. "I've told you the history. It's my choice." Eno's gaze flicked over the tomes. "I know, I'm just worried about the location. You don't want to pick something you can't change later." "There's nothing to choose," Rena said, moving with the light, predatory grace of an acromantula. She had 8 legs, now curled easily on the tabletop, but her tone carried that old, legendary witch's authority. "This is about living again. I'm satisfied. Since I entered Narnia, all I met was malice and rejection. Living now wasn't something I expected. You brought me back." "You're not free," Eno said at last. He'd avoided the subject for a long time. He knew the sanctuary's miracle gave him near absolute control over Rena, and saying it aloud made the room still for a few seconds. Time stretched, marked only by the little sounds of the dormitory, until Rena broke the silence with a soft chuckle. "So, will you force me to do things?" she asked. Eno's voice was immediate and defensive. "Of course not. If you're not free, why call it unfree?" He sounded lighter after he'd said it, as if confessing had unloaded a weight. Rena didn't bristle. Instead, she let the conversation move on. "I don't know how long this will last," she warned. "Ask what you need to ask soon. This world feels strange to me." Strange didn't begin to cover it. Eno had long known that the magical world wrapped itself in a kind of hush and smoke, everything beautiful and high-end and ultimately opaque, the sort of place where the deepest workings were cloaked. He had learned not to obsess over absolute truth. Perhaps his life as a disguised bard had taught him to accept almost, rather than chase extremes. Still, Rena's remark opened a door he didn't want to leave closed. If I have a question right now, it's only one. He let the syllables hang, then summoned the boggart that had been hiding in the shadows. Black mist pooled and swirled, thick and cold, and rose until it filled most of the small chamber. Hogwarts has no secrets, and it has 1,000 of them, he said plainly. Our dorms are private and safe, but look. The black cloud twisted, not quite taking the clean form of a boggart that usually mimicked fear. The sanctuary's mechanism let me accidentally take control of this boggart. Then a second magical outburst happened, and things changed. Rena's legs stirred the smoke as if skimming a river. Of course, she said. You believed it. You mean because I thought the boggart and nightmares were linked? Eno asked. Yes. Rena's voice was like a chill breeze. Belief matters. A magical outburst, especially the ones that happen to children who've never trained, can do things older, more trained witches and wizards find impossible. When they're in an emotional state, a child's wish can come true. It doesn't grant wishes the way a fairy does. It manifests the secret desire. A child wants a cake, and a cake appears. A child wants to fly, and they might float. It's unpredictable, and it answers the heart's urgent, private thing. As she spoke, Eno's thoughts fell into place. He remembered the ironclad example, 11-year-old Harry at the zoo, staring at the glass around the boa constrictor, and with no wand or speech, the glass vanished. That had been evidence of raw, untrained magic acting on a young wizard's desire. If a boggart stirred such an outburst, and Eno himself believed, if only subconsciously, that boggart was bound up with nightmares, then the outburst could reshape what the boggart was. Under that almost wishful power, the connection he imagined might become real. Rena's eyes, unsettlingly intelligent from their many facets, watched him. It's not just the magic, it's the story you tell about it, and the story you allow it to believe back. She tapped a chitinous leg against the table, leaving a faint, precise sound. You gave it a line to follow by thinking the thing was tied to nightmares. The outburst supplied the power. Together, they made something new. The black mist in the dorm seemed to listen. The room smelled of old parchment and candle smoke, and the odd books on the table. The acromantula perched like a relic, the altered boggart, all combined into an image that would have made darker minds proud. Eno let the explanation settle in the air, feeling the strange mix of dread and curiosity that had pushed him into this whole mess. So that's it, he said quietly. The outburst, your belief, and the way the sanctuary let me reach into it, it became something else. Rena's smile was small but satisfied. Yes, and while you worry about control, remember, magic changes with the heart that uses it. Be careful what you tell the world you are afraid of. It might answer. 244, 150, magical miracles. The Slytherin dormitory was wrapped in a dark, thick fog that gradually thinned, as if it had a will of its own. The mist gathered and merged with the shadows in little clumps. The wizard's second magic riot produced countless miracles that can't be duplicated, and that's only the beginning, someone murmured. When Eno had time to take it all in, he sighed from the bottom of his chest. 150 chocolate frog cards. This wasn't a child's card collecting game. These were 150 magical miracles. The terrifying Oglaf, the invincible Andros, Archibald Alderton, who'd accidentally blown away an entire village while trying to bake a cake, each name represented a singular, unreproducible event. At the same time, it underlined just how uncontrollable a magic riot could be. Thoughts racing, Eno made connections in all directions. Parseltongue, Nicholas Flamel, and the Philosopher's Stone, the four founders, Merlin himself. Whether black or white, good or evil, those wizards whose names were carved into the history of magic were, in the end, ephemeral and unique miracles. At the same time, Lena made her request. If you already know the answer in your heart, please send me back now, if it's convenient. I want to spend the rest of my time with that flower. Of course, Eno didn't hesitate. It's completely different inside now. You wouldn't recognize it. They even added a valley to the east. He knew Lena couldn't return to the sanctuary on her own. Fide and the boggart were in the same position. They had ties to the place, but lacked the permission to come and go at will. With that in mind, Eno gently lifted Lena's foot with one hand and rested the other on the stack of 5 or 6 handwritten spellbooks on the table. With a soft motion, he made them vanish. The dormitory fell quiet again. Meanwhile, on another side of the castle, in the Gryffindor fifth-year dormitory, George and Fred sat on their bed with a jumbled pile of coins between them. Most were copper nuts and silver sickles, but there were a fair number of galleons mixed in. "How much do you think we'll need?" George asked, staring at the coins. This was the sum of the twins' earnings over 3 years. "I don't know, but it won't be cheap, I imagine," Fred said. With Eno back, they were planning to buy a film mirror. Their aim was simple: take the original, rework it, and sell their own improved version. Fred knew they hadn't spent so much time filming with Malfoy just for profit. They'd been studying the mirror to learn its flaws. Their hard observations had turned up a business idea. The film mirror, when not showing footage, behaved like a plain, uninspired mirror. The dressing mirror at the Burrow, by contrast, was opinionated, finding fault, sometimes even cursing. So why not let the mirror judge the mirror? Strip the Burrow mirror's personality-freezing bits and graft in its commentary features to the film mirror. Then, whenever it played footage, the mirror itself could praise, carp, or swear at the viewers. It was a brilliant idea, but the question was how much a film mirror would cost. "Altogether, we only have 24 galleons and 13 sickles," George said, spreading his hands in helplessness. He knew it wouldn't be nearly enough. "What about the straw rings? And there's still 3 galleons for the jumping and frolicking payment at the end of the month, right?" Fred added belatedly, then shook his head. The extra galleons still wouldn't be enough. As the twins fretted, another voice spoke up in the dormitory. Jordan Lee looked at them with mild amusement. The duo's usual sharpness seemed to have disappeared. They looked once like ordinary, tailless, swallow-tailed dogs. "Why buy it yourselves? Sharing profits through a partnership is the smart move. Besides, I don't think you can afford it. Like Muggle televisions, each one is very expensive." Jordan spoke eloquently. To be frank, the first appearance of the film mirror in the Great Hall had surprised him, but only briefly. It was, after all, a wizarding television. Many young wizards from Muggle families weren't as impressed as others might expect. Hearing Jordan, George and Fred both had a sudden realization, then saw the same foolishness reflected in the other's eyes. "I told you we shouldn't spend all our time with Ron," one muttered. "You're right. A foolish younger brother can be useful for making money, but you must keep your distance." They teased each other, but both knew the issue wasn't Ron, nor was it really worth a nut. It had to do with Malfoy. Spending so much time around him had left them subconsciously reluctant to involve him. With Jordan's suggestion, they realized Malfoy could be just a runner, maybe even a free one. Satisfied, they finished gathering the loose change and headed out of the dorm. Similar scenes played out across the castle. Everyone wanted one of the interesting new things. Before, without the inventor's presence, people could only sit on their ideas. But with Eno's return, many minds were set in motion. In the Ravenclaw Tower, Cho Chang was surrounded by a crowd. As the house's darling and the Quidditch seeker, beautiful and talented, Cho never lacked attention from the opposite sex, but right now she was mostly surrounded by girls. Ravenclaw had, since Rowena's time, favored the company of women. In Britain, brilliance among girls was never scarce. But the Ravenclaw girls, who should have been calm and composed, had turned into a chattering flock, each eager to have her opinion heard. "We should film an opera. A love story, a tragic, tear-jerking love story. We should record educational material like the bookshelf in the common room. Put the mirror there for future first years to study." Cho listened to a dozen older girls talk at once while the younger ones, afraid to speak up, leaned in to catch every word. "Stop! Your endless discussions are like a horklump." A tremendously loud voice echoed through the tower, making everyone cover their ears reflexively. After a moment, the girls turned toward the speaker, blinking in annoyance. In the entire castle, and perhaps in the whole British wizarding world, no one had ever dared to provoke a Ravenclaw girl like that. 245. The Addition of Twins. Penelope Clearwater stood in the Ravenclaw common room like a pole of calm in the middle of a storm. Seventh-year prefect and chair of the Hogwarts Student Council, She held the attention of the room as easily as she held her wand. Facing the angry stares, she slowly lowered her wand. Any objections? Speak up. I'm waiting. By her 7th year, Penelope was undeniably a grown witch. Tall and composed, the authority she'd earned serving as prefect for 3 years made people look away rather than meet her gaze. I'm genuinely curious, she said, sweeping her eyes over the assembly. What is the basis of your argument here? Her look didn't settle on anyone in particular so much as it cut across the room like a hawk scanning its territory. All of your plans hinge on Eno Swinburne being willing to sell you a film mirror. You're banking everything on a friendship between Cho and Eno, a friendship that exists only because they're in the same club. Use your heads. This is Eno Swinburne, not Cedric Diggory. Her words silenced the room. Cho flushed crimson and pressed a hand to her forehead. Why the comparison? She would have liked to be the one Eno waited for, but now was not the time for such thoughts. Penelope noticed Cho's discomfort and gave her a brief, apologetic smile. Right? Anyone who wants to speak or bid, bring your galleons and register with me. She flicked her wand and a piece of parchment and a quill rose and floated in the air. All funds will be transparent and publicly accounted for. A similar scene was playing out in Hufflepuff. Only the central figure there was Cedric. None of them, though, had any idea what Eno was doing that afternoon. In his sanctuary in the valley, after using a weather charm to water the magical plants, he set the books Lena had copied into a white marble room. The shelves were still relatively bare, but instead of disappointment, he felt pride. There were only a handful of volumes, but their value was enormous. Time Reversal, Resurrection of the Dead, a book of invisibility that revealed hidden things, notes from the Gaunt family, the Half-Blood Prince's potion techniques, and his own basilisk leather journals with alchemical formulas for relics like Ravenclaw's diadem, Slytherin's locket, and the Time Turner. On top of that, Lena had copied 6 books from the restricted section and added them to the collection. I'm getting richer and richer, he murmured, running a hand along the shelf. Lena's laughter drifted down from the blue spiderweb that decorated the ceiling as she poked her head out. You're only truly rich if you understand what's inside. Otherwise, all this wealth is just temporarily under your care. I'll take my time, Lena teased. I'm not exactly short of it. That didn't bother him at all. Even the most conservative estimates of the sanctuary's gifts meant he had more than twice the lifespan of an ordinary wizard. Before dinner, Eno left the valley. As he reached the entrance to the Great Hall, he spotted the Weasley twins leaning against a pillar and Cho standing nearby, hesitating. Without thinking about anyone else, he walked straight toward Cho. Their friendship had always been the deeper one. George and Fred instantly put on exaggerated faces of mock despair, but Eno ignored them and kept going. If I'm not mistaken, the Flower of Ravenclaw has been waiting specifically for me. What an honor, he said with a smile. You're infuriating, Cho shot back, though there was no real heat in it. Once, she might actually have waited for him in earnest, but he had been silent then. All right, spit it out. What do you want? Eno didn't bother with small talk. He'd already noticed several Hufflepuffs slipping out of the Great Hall as if making an escape. On behalf of Ravenclaw, I'd like to buy a film mirror, Cho said bluntly, producing a Gringotts money pouch from her pocket. Here, 220 galleons. If it's not enough, tell me how much more. Speak plainly. Most of this money isn't even mine. Eno inwardly admired Cho, who said all Ravenclaws were bookworms. I'll give you one, he said. Don't refuse so quickly. Hear me out first. This is about more than the mirror. It's about promotion, building momentum. Smart people saw the angle at once. Cho's dark, clear eyes brightened with understanding and admiration. I'll wait then. Same time tomorrow, she said, each word deliberate, as if she meant it literally. Neither of them lingered in the crowded Great Hall. Rumors moved fast enough without giving them a show. Cho left with a brisk step. Eno was about to head off for dinner when Fred and George flanked him, one on each side, perfectly at the right moment. Say what you need to say. My stomach's complaining, George quipped. Eno had a great deal of patience for these two. Keep it short, he said. Fred went first. We want to work with you. Or rather, we have an idea we want to run by you. Tell me. Eno's interest perked, The twins' schemes had surprised him before. "Our family has a talking dressing mirror," George started. 5 minutes later, Eno knew exactly what they meant. The idea moved him, a magical mirror that could host a kind of film criticism or a magic talk show where the mirror itself quipped and commented. It would be entertaining. "I like it. It's a brilliant idea," he said. "I'll give you the mirror, and I'd like to invite you to the borough this summer. Come and see our joke shops." Fred and George exchanged a look and pressed their invitation. "We'll write before we go. And if the borough's inconvenient, come to Hogsmeade, either way." Eno didn't refuse. A summer at the borough sounded like a proper magical dream. "But I'll give you the mirror on one condition. Don't be quick to refuse. Listen to what I have to say first." He rehearsed his point again, explaining his broader vision. "The magical world lacks industrialization. We don't need more unique high-end alchemical pieces. We need quantity, the popularization of good magical products. Industrialization? Quantity?" George and Fred looked puzzled. "Yes, we don't lack clever, high-end alchemy. We lack accessibility." He described, as clearly as he could, how Muggle assembly lines worked and what scaling production could look like for magical goods. He wanted the twins involved. Their knack for reaching a wide audience could make the difference between a one-off curiosity and something that changed the market. Shaudi's share for today. Clabbert British Ministry of Magic Classification Level, XEX. Origin and distribution. Native to the southern United States, Clabberts have since been exported worldwide. Appearance. A cross between a monkey and a frog, Clabberts have smooth, green, mottled, hairless skin, webbed hands and feet, and long, flexible limbs that let them swing through the treetops like apes. 246. Arrangements before leaving school. In stories about magic, wizards always feel a little mysterious. How mysterious? They go to the same school, read the same books, learn from the same professors, and yet their talents differ wildly. What Hermione knows, Harry might not. What Harry knows, Ron might not. And what Dumbledore knows, no one else does. Wizards paid little heed to industrialization, and only 2 trades ever reached anything like semi-industrial scale: newspapers and sweets, chocolate frogs and Bertie Bott's every flavor beans being prime examples. More than a month earlier, Eno had already been thinking about the future of the film mirror, or rather, a plan for it. Real-time broadcasting like radio or television was out of reach with current magic and materials. The only viable approach was to cut costs, make the device affordable, and sell it as a consumable rather than a luxury. Bundled sales would help reduce the price even more. From the start of the conversation, the Weasley twins had tried to stay quiet and not interrupt, but when Eno mentioned bundles, George couldn't help but speak up. "The Daily Prophet won't agree. A paper that costs 2 nuts can't cover the cost of a film mirror." "Yeah, the Prophet's complicated," Fred added, nodding seriously. Eno didn't argue. He shifted the topic. "Let's put the newspapers aside for now. We need to focus on lowering production costs and scaling up." "I happen to have a small island in Croatia," George said with a grin, "but we can talk about that after summer. Right now, I need to eat." Dinner had a set time at Hogwarts, and people in the Great Hall were already thinning out. The twins knew when to stop. Once they'd got what they wanted, they let the subject drop. After all, they'd already made summer plans. Days passed without hurry. A week before exams, a craze for filming swept the castle. Students in all 4 houses wanted time with the film mirror. Even though there was only a single prototype, that didn't diminish anyone's enthusiasm. The professors suppressed it quickly. Understandable enough. If students lounged around filming instead of studying before finals, there'd be no room for entertainment at all. With the teacher's intervention, the castle settled back into its usual tense, studious rhythm. Outside the castle, the grounds were green and lively. Needing to escape the restlessness of exam season, Eno visited Hagrid's hut. He sank into the sofa, relaxed. "Hagrid, are you staying at Hogwarts over the summer?" he asked, wondering whether Hagrid's duties would keep him on site as gamekeeper or professor. "Yeah, I'll be here," Hagrid said, setting 2 cans of butterbeer on the table and collapsing into a stout chair. His voice rumbled. "I'll be at the castle, but I've got freedom. If I plan, I can go away for a few days now and then." Hagrid rarely wanted to leave anyway. After taking on the new little acromantulas, He had no mind to leave them uncared for. Eno understood what he meant. He felt he should make the arrangements properly and see things through. Hagrid, if you don't mind, I'd like to invite you to come with me for the summer, Eno said. Before he finished, Hagrid interrupted. Course, no problem. I heard you bought a place in Hogsmeade. No, Croatia, Eno corrected, and briefly explained the plan. An island, a dragon sanctuary, and moving the little acromantulas there so they wouldn't unbalance the Forbidden Forest. A island? A dragon sanctuary? And moving the acromantulas? Hagrid was stunned. Even behind his thick beard, his astonishment was clear. Something like that. We won't have to hide them anymore. Eno tapped the table lightly. A thin frost spread across the 2 cans of butterbeer. He popped one open and drank the cool liquid, refreshing on a June afternoon. Hagrid blinked and then smiled broadly. A private island, far from the mainland, Hagrid said. Proper freedom. Private property's sacred. Only the Ministry could pry into it if need be. I'll write to you over the summer, Eno said, looking out the window. But you can start preparing now. In a short minute, the clear afternoon sky had clouded over. Life can be like the weather, sunny days, cloudy days, and sometimes storms. No one escapes it. The last day before leaving school for the year made everyone nostalgic. Graduating students, Percy, Penelope, and others, found themselves sentimental. Places they'd once taken for granted felt suddenly precious. The library doors, the moving staircases, the pictures in the corridors, even the furnishings of the common rooms. Each corner seemed to carry the weight of 7 years. The day before the end of term, Eno was stopped again. This time, not in the Great Hall, but in the Slytherin common room. Percy and Penelope arrived together as the male and female head students of Hogwarts. Their gleaming badges gave them authority in the castle almost equal to a professor's. After a brief exchange, Eno agreed to their request. I can give you 4 film mirrors, one for each house's graduation commemorations, he said. I don't have many left, so that's the most I can spare. Percy and Penelope shared a quick, grateful look. Thank you, Mr. Swinburne. 4 will be perfect, Percy said formally. It's nothing, Eno waved him off. I understand the sentiment, and there's good news. By summer, the film mirror should be available in Diagon Alley, so making copies for keepsakes won't be a problem. Even if the 2 head students hadn't come, he'd planned to host a Slytherin graduation banquet tomorrow and take commemorative pictures. Their visit simply saved him some trouble. 247. Nothing has changed. Everything is changing. Nothing has changed. Everything is changing. In mid-June, the evening wind carried a welcome chill. Eno shouldered a suitcase and walked alone along the winding flagstone path from the castle to Hogsmeade. It was only a half-hour route, but he deliberately stretched it into more than an hour. There was no practical reason. He simply wanted to slow down. Life and time were both rushing forward. Perhaps the rare luxury now was to move more slowly than everything else. Near Hogsmeade, the air smelled of candy and herbs. Honeydukes must be experimenting with new confections again. The shops lining the high street were a cheerful riot of color. Through the windows, enchanted trinkets and the latest magical fashions flashed and sparkled. Open though they were, these shops lacked Diagon Alley's bustle and commercial intensity. They felt quieter, more like village stores. That was part of Hogsmeade's charm, tranquility tucked into the middle of the noise. Eno wandered back to his cottage. After the Flu network had been connected, he'd given the place a cozy name for the convenience of travel, a little house in the countryside. He pushed open the front door and climbed to his room on the 2nd floor. A few quick cleaning charms left everything fresh. He opened the window and let the last wash of sunset glow spill across the floorboards. Settling back into a reclining chair by the sill, he casually opened the restricted section transcription Lena had made, Techniques of the Killing Curse. Simple, efficient. 1 spell to kill. The Killing Curse had been held up as the epitome of the dark arts, feared and forbidden. Its uniqueness was undeniable, and in practice, it had always been more of a threat than a battlefield tactic. Eno had wanted to understand it for a long time, but as long as the old headmaster controlled the castle, the most dangerous books were always locked away. Lena's transcriptions had changed that. Things that had been sealed for safety no longer needed to be for him. Days slipped by. On the 3rd day of the holiday, After 2 restful days and some shopping, Eno had packed a surprising number of supplies into his suitcase. He'd even persuaded Fide, the small, impatient phoenix, to take temporary refuge inside a specially prepared compartment. Judging by how things had gone before, it was almost time for the next story door to open. He didn't know which world would call this time, but a phoenix around saved a lot of trouble. At dawn on the 4th day, he woke with a jolt. Without hesitation, he grabbed the suitcase from beneath the bed and was gone. Middle-earth. Third Age, year 3015. The Shire. Bag End. Bilbo was bored. He sat in his armchair, puffing at his pipe. The ring had passed to Frodo, and Gandalf had gone on his way. The small adventures of a lifetime felt like pages already turned. "It's good it's gone," Bilbo muttered, taking a long draw of Shire pipeweed. Everything here was meant for Frodo anyway. A cheerful bang, bang, bang interrupted the moment. Bilbo scowled. "Don't bother me. I've told you, no more parties, no more calls, no visits. You're not welcome." For years, he'd preferred the quiet of Bag End to new acquaintances. He'd seen too many friends and relatives go. He'd no stomach for fresh goodbyes. Yet the knocking went on, stubborn and loud. "Barrel-riding thief, are you going to open this door or not? If not, I'm off," the voice called. Barrel rider, thief. The words, the cadence, struck something in Bilbo. The pipe slipped from his fingers before he realized it. He sprang up faster than he looked, and the door was thrown wide open. A figure from the past stood on the threshold, smiling like the noon sun out of nowhere. Bilbo's eyes went damp. "My old friend, I've missed you. It's been too long, too long." After 45 years, Eno stood in the Shire again, grinning and carrying a suitcase. "I've missed you too. I brought fireworks and new stories." That night, the Shire kept its easy peace. A breeze rustled the gardens, exactly like the night 45 years ago when one of them had left. Candlelight made a cozy pool in Bag End. Bilbo settled back, his wrinkled face softened with pleasure. "You don't know what's been happening," he said, warming to his subject. "Ever since you left, everyone's been teasing Gandalf as a clumsy fireworks maker. His rockets have cough, cough." Bilbo broke off in an old man's coughing fit. "Reparo," Eno said, flicking his wand with a practiced motion, then took 2 sealed bottles of grass juice from his case. "Old fellow, slow down." He opened one and handed it across, patting Bilbo's back as if he were a much younger man. "Drink, don't talk too fast." "I'm not rushing, I'm just too happy." Bilbo drank and tried to steady himself. As Bilbo relaxed, Eno asked about the people he'd last known. "Grandma Julia? No, never mind. Where's Lily? When I arrived, her room was empty." Bilbo's face darkened briefly. "Lily doesn't live in the Shire anymore," he said, then sighed. "She left after we buried Grandma Julia." Eno blinked. "What happened to her?" "The winter after you left," Bilbo said softly. "Julia didn't make it through. Lily and I buried her beneath the old grapevine." The quiet in Bag End grew heavy with memory. In the candlelight, Eno saw, as if through a window of time, a frail old woman with an oil lamp, taking Lily's hand as they stood together in the twilight on the edge of the green. Time had moved them all forward. "You should try to accept it," Bilbo said. "You learn that the hard way, my friend." He knew grief. He had carried far more of it than most. The room seemed to hold every small, stubborn thing they both had left to cherish. Candle smoke, pipe ash, the scent of fireworks waiting in a suitcase, and the steady warmth of old friendship. 248. The story begins at Bag End. Decades had passed since they last met. Bilbo talked on and on, from dusk into the deep of night and on into dawn. At last, exhausted, he fell asleep mid-conversation. Eno used a levitation charm to lift him into bed and then slipped out of Bag End. It was a clear, starlit night in the Shire. Moonlight washed the hills, and Eno walked to a grapevine as thick as a bowl. In front of him rose a solitary mound of earth, its surface armored in hardy plantain. The plants clung stubbornly to the ground, but could not disguise the weight of years. Tiny white flowers nodded on their stems in the night breeze. Not a celebratory dance, but a wistful sway as if remembering some long-forgotten past. "Grandma Julia, I'm back. The oil lamp lit my way home," he whispered. Time was relentless, like water flowing downstream. Eno sat quietly before the mound, sometimes speaking, sometimes silent. He did not return to Bag End until the faint light of dawn creased the eastern sky. Seeing Bilbo sleeping soundly, he did not disturb him, but went to the guest room next door. Much had changed. Much had stayed the same. Lily, the little girl who had once been so frail, now had a family in a human village not far from the Shire. Bilbo had told him she was the mother of 3 and might even become a grandmother next year. Eno did not plan to visit openly. If he went at all, he would do so in secret. Some memories, once softened by time, need not be raked open again. Clarity often brought pain. In the guest room, Eno opened his suitcase and the space filled with flashes of blue and black. The ink-dark boggart melted into his shadow while Fi, small and bright-eyed, perched happily on the wooden beams of Bag End. Eno pretended not to notice and turned his attention to the table. "It's the third age, 3D15, he said aloud. "Frodo's already set off with the One Ring. I don't know how long I'll stay this time, but I need a plan." "What do you want to do?" Lena asked, shrinking down until the acromantula was only 3 inches tall. She looked unexpectedly charming. "Not about me, about you," Eno replied, a little helpless. Ever since he'd first slipped into a fantasy story, he had never planned anything deliberate, especially not in a world this vast and epic. "Me? Can't Middle-earth take care of me?" Lena said softly. "It can," he answered, "but your acromantula kin will need a place to settle, and you'll want some capital left behind. Could Middle-earth accommodate outsiders? Certainly." This world was bigger than the continent usually called Middle-earth. Beyond it lay Aman in the west and the sunlit continents in the east, vast, unclaimed lands. Lena pressed him again. "I told you don't have to worry about me. I'll follow my own plans." Faced with her resolve, he said no more. To become a legendary witch, she would not be foolish. After a year spent in the restricted section at Hogwarts and learning the background of this story, she could make sensible arrangements for herself. "All right," Eno said softly. "If that's your choice, I'll respect it." Once Lena was no longer his worry, other matters demanded planning. First, how long should he stay? Frodo's departure from the Shire made it seem like events were moving quickly, but in truth, the Fellowship's journey from the Shire to Mordor stretched out over nearly 10 years. The story only truly wound down in TA 321. Eno reviewed the timeline and reached a helpless conclusion. He couldn't change much right now. He had wanted to take part in the Battle of Helm's Deep in Rohan, TA 3019, 4 years hence. He hadn't planned that simply for the thrill. After spending time with the young Theoden and absorbing the spirit of the world, it felt wrong to stand aside. Before, when he lacked the power to meddle, ignorance had been a shield. Now, with ability, doing nothing would make him complicit. If he watched orcs slaughter and did not act, seeing it again and again might dull him beyond casting even a Patronus. He knew that sounded extreme, but great changes often began with small, indistinguishable steps, like the warnings in the book Techniques of the Killing Curse, which advised that for safety, one should practice no more than 3 times a week. "Do you already have an idea?" Lena asked at last, watching his expression settle. "I do." He outlined his plan. "I'll stay quietly for a while. If it turns out I won't be leaving until after the story ends, I'll join the defense at Helm's Deep. That way, future tales won't only show wizards fighting at close quarters with swords." He had another motive tucked under that plan, to earn some favor with Gandalf, and to leave a small goodwill that might benefit Lena. Lena's voice was unchanged when she answered. "I thought you'd choose to go to Rohan and rescue the king you once photographed. Go head-to-head with Saruman?" Eno looked up, surprised. "I know more of the dark arts than white magic right now. Apart from the Patronus, I can't think of a way to break Saruman's enchantment." According to the story, Theoden would be freed by Gandalf in time. While Theoden was under the spell, nothing beyond the king dismissing his soldiers had been catastrophic. For a horse-loving nation like Rohan, sending soldiers home looked more like hurting than harm. "You decide what to do," Lena said coolly. "If worst comes to worst, we'll just switch worlds. No big deal." Eno smiled to comfort her. "It's nothing." Back in Bag End, Bilbo dreamed a long, winding dream. In it, his old friend, the human wizard Eno, who had once saved his life, came to visit again. After 45 years, the other man looked the same as when he'd left, perhaps a little taller. When Bilbo opened his eyes, he could still taste fragments of their conversation. They had talked far into the night. "Wake up when you're done sleeping. You haven't given me Lily's address yet." came a familiar voice from outside the room. Bilbo started awake, and the memories of the prior night snapped back into place. Ha! It wasn't a dream then. I'll take you there in a bit. I've got nothing to do. Let's go visit Lily and her 3 children. Though a century old, Bilbo sprang from his bed with nimble energy and stepped out, cheerfully humming. He was back in Middle-earth. This time it felt like both a new beginning and the close of the great tale that had stretched across the ages. 249. The hero is old. The company grows. Middle-earth, Third Age, 318. In peaceful times, time slips by unnoticed. Eno had lived quietly in the Shire for 3 years. After the first year, he was convinced he'd hit the jackpot. He could stay until the story ran its course, then return. 7 years of story time, luxury beyond measure. Reading, farming, and studying alchemy and magic became his whole life. There were still diversions. He helped with the Shire's fireworks at the annual party, and he visited Lily and Bilbo. When he visited Lily, he never showed himself, though. He cast a disillusionment charm, watched from afar, and left a few alchemical amulets. Lily, now middle-aged, showed a few of Grandma Julia's traits, but she was far happier than Julia had been. A loving husband, 3 grown children with families of their own, and a newborn grandson. On a green field in the Shire, a young man in a linen robe materialized. He was at least 6 feet tall. His dark hair caught the sunlight with a faint blue sheen. His sculpted, almost elven features, save for his unpointed ears, made him striking. Eno had entered Middle-earth at 15. 3 years later, he was 18. For a while, he had taken on the physique of an adult wizard, only temporary, because everything would revert when the story ended. Physical changes and the erosion of time would all be undone. Aguamenti. Eno flicked his wand. A thick jet of water shot skyward, but instead of falling, it hung in the air, gathering until it formed a 10-foot sphere. Guided as if by an invisible hand, the sphere slowly rotated and tiny droplets fell in a gentle artificial rain across the fields. Water-making, levitation, and elemental transfiguration, 3 magics woven together. Finished, Eno vanished again. 3 years had given him time to deepen his magic and to systematically organize what he'd learned. Bag end after lunch. Bilbo expertly packed 2 pipes. "Try this one of mine. It's been aging for nearly 100 years, he said. Eno took the pipe but did not light it. Instead, he drew from his trunk a dusty box. "What's that?" Bilbo asked, voice full of memory. Eno opened the box. Inside lay the tobacco he had once traded with Bilbo in Beorn's house during his first trip to Middle-earth. Bilbo reached out with trembling fingers and refilled his pipe. A match flared. The 2 of them sat back and puffed contentedly. The smoke was mellow. Eno closed his eyes. Over the past year, he had slowly been assimilated into Bilbo's life and had grown fond of Shire tobacco. Time slipped past in the quiet. When the smoke thinned, Bilbo spoke slowly. "Old friend, are you going to leave?" Before Eno could answer, Bilbo continued to himself. "Don't try to fool me, but I'm glad you've been willing to stay so long. They come and go in a hurry. Gandalf hardly ever stays more than a few days." Bilbo's voice was calm, but under it lay the weary timber of a hero in decline. He was a hero, undoubtedly. He had faced the temptation of the One Ring and stood firm. He had bested Smaug, a terrible and proud creature, not some tamed beast but an adversary on a grand scale. Time, however, is merciless. The daring hobbit adventurer had become an old man who coughed at a puff of smoke. Bilbo rambled on until his voice softened and he drifted into a light snore. An azure sky over rolling grassland. A black swan of a bird cut the air. The land was Rohan, a horse-born people's kingdom. Compared to Númenor and Gondor, Rohan was the native human realm of Middle-earth. Its proud cavalry had carved out a great domain. Rohan's border reached west to the Isen and the Anduin, touching Isengard and the Dunlendings, south to the arid Nimrais and Moria's streams, bordering Gondor, east to the Untwash, north to the Limelight. Edoras, the capital, sat against the White Mountains like a fortress city. But time had taken its toll. Once brilliant Edoras wore a shade of decay. People no longer lingered in market stalls. Transactions were brisk and wordless. Everyone understood why, and their loyalty made them endure silently. The king's commands were not questioned. Yet things had shifted. 2 groups of visitors had recently come to Edoras. The first had helped King Theoden regain his wits and had driven out the traitor Grima. The second had brought a fresh, if fragile, vitality to the weary city. Across the wide plains of Rohan, a long procession stretched for hundreds of meters, tens of thousands if one counted the small belongings in carts. 4,000 to 5,000 people seemed to sway like a great python moving over the grass. From a distance, it was one slow, writhing line. Up close, the truth emerged. Most were old, infirm, women and children. Many were wounded. Able-bodied young men were scarce. At the head of the column, Eno rode a brown nag, scanning the horizon. This had come about 6 months earlier, when he left the Shire and flew toward Rohan using animagus transfiguration. He had expected a straightforward journey, but the road was not kind. Perhaps the shadow of renewed darkness had loosened orcs and raiders. Villages and market towns were being pillaged along his route. The closer he got to Rohan, the worse it became. He found elderly folk, pregnant women, and frightened children abandoned or scattered among the ruins. He could not look away. What started as rescuing a handful of infants and children in ruined villages became a steady procession of survivors. The group swelled, women with belongings slung on called men clinging to each other, bloody bandages, thousands heading toward the relative safety of Edoras. Though the trip could have been completed in 10 days by flight, Eno had walked for 6 months, stopping to help, to carry, to defend. He did not regret a single day. When he had seen an ugly orc raise its blade to strike a toddler, no older than 2, he had already decided what he would do. Even if it cost him the story's timeline, even if he gained nothing here, he would not stand aside. 250. Meeting an old friend, Theoden of Rohan White Mountains. The capital of Rohan, Edoras. Inside the great hall, Gandalf stood quietly before the throne. On the dais sat King Theoden. Years of erosion and a malign bewitchment had left the once valiant king feeble and aged. His face was twisted, his eyes hollow. He looked more like a stiff puppet than a living man. With Grima subdued, the other guards did not interfere with these outsiders. Many of them secretly hoped that this renowned wizard of Middle-earth could help their lord. A suffocating, tense hush spread through the hall. Gandalf, staff in hand, stood less than 5 meters from Theoden. When Gandalf spoke a mysterious word, the assembled watched in eager expectation, and Theoden let out a hard, contemptuous laugh. "You do not have enough magic, Greybeard. Gandalf!" Gandalf shrugged aside his gray cloak. He cast off the gray robes, and a dazzling white light flowed from him. The brilliance forced everyone to squint. The Maya who had come to Middle-earth seemed to decide at that moment not to conceal his power any longer. Energy gathered in his staff, and before Gandalf, now robed in white, the possessed Theoden fell silent, bound to his chair as if by invisible chains. It was like poison being drawn from a wound. Freed from Saruman's control, Theoden's frailty fell away, and he returned to the strong, middle-aged man he had been. A brave figure hurried from the crowd and steadied the king as he came back to himself. Theoden looked at the young woman beside him and said with difficulty, "I know your face, Éowyn." Gandalf's voice carried warmth and relief. "The dream is over now. Breathe, my friend." "You are Gandalf," Theoden whispered, blinking as he took in his surroundings, then asked, anxious, "Where is Hyojed and Éomer?" On the plains 30 miles from Dorzoralis, Eno pressed his staff to his throat and cast a voice-amplifying spell. At the sound, a blond youth leading a dozen cavaliers broke off from the main column and urged his horse forward to the front of the procession. Eno instructed the youth before him. He knew the youth's identity clearly, having recognized him the moment he saw him. The man at the head of the column raised his helmet and answered, "Hyojed, take your cavalry and distribute food. We will try to reach Edoras today." Eno had known at once who the youth was. Hyojed was the crown prince of Rohan, Theoden's only son. He had been presumed dead at the fords of Isen, but fate had thrown him into a ragged group of the old, the weak, women, and children. Out of gratitude, and from a prince's duty, Hyojed had led the remaining riders to join them. The ordeal had steadied him. Where once he might have been impetuous, now he nodded rock solid and said, "Leave it to me." Eno produced a few pieces of dried cheese and ham from a box, waved his staff, and the food multiplied. 1 became 2, 2 became 4, until it piled up like a small mountain. Even though they had seen this wondrous sight many times, Hyojed and the riders were still struck with awe. They did not stand gawking. Everyone dismounted, slung woven sacks from their horses, and began to pack the food in an orderly fashion. Then the cavalry set out to distribute rations. Eno took a moment to light a shire pipe for himself. He had not hidden his work along the way. He had openly used magic to feed the many thousands who followed them. The reason was simple. These people were survivors of orc attacks and had almost no supplies. Without the use of magic to sustain them, half of the refugees, families, old men, and children would have starved within days, certainly within weeks. People used to say an army of 10,000 was boundless. In truth, it did not take 10,000. Only a few thousand could make all the difference. The long procession stretched for hundreds of meters, and by dusk the city on the hillside, Edoras, the capital of Rohan, lay before them. At the same time, in the great hall of Edoras, a gathering that might determine the fate of Middle-earth was underway. "These are only the beginning of Saruman's bloody massacres," Gandalf said earnestly. "His cruelty springs from fear of Sauron. You must rise. Only then can you save your people." Theoden did not answer at once. The choice weighed heavily on him. Rohan could not bear another war. He knew that better than any. During the years he had been bewitched, Grima's reckless deeds had hollowed the kingdom's strength to the bone. Edoras could no longer muster 1,000 riders. Rohan was weaker now than it had been for a long time. Seeing Theoden fall silent, Aragorn spoke up. "You still have 2,000 fine riders to the north. Those are Éomer's men." At that moment, a low bell began to toll from outside the door. The alarm bell. Theoden sprang to his feet, seized the sword at his side, and strode for the door. Gandalf, Aragorn, and the others in the hall seized their weapons and followed. The capital's ancient alarm bell, silent for over 100 years, suddenly rang. Its peal threw all of Edoras into a brief panic, then into swift, grim purpose. Men and women, old and young, began to arm themselves. Elderly men, the injured and lame, even half-grown boys picked up whatever weapons they could find: farm tools, short bows, rusty longswords. There were no age differences now, only one identity: soldiers of Rohan. Fear showed on some youths' faces, but none faltered. When ranks formed, the old men instinctively stood before the younger ones, a shield in front of them, despite their stoop. Theoden and his company climbed to the highest point of the city gate. In the distance, on the rim of the plain, a black line stretched across the horizon for hundreds of meters. Under the setting sun, Edoras lay clear against the plains. After 6 months on the road, the journey had finally come to an end. The column of more than 5,000 people burst into cheers. Long hidden smiles brightened tired faces. The procession moved slowly forward. Eno, however, had noticed something the others had not. The soldiers of Edoras, fully armed, lined up ahead. To avoid any misunderstanding, he drew his wand while still on horseback and pointed it skyward. Incendio! A spray of orange flames shot up. Within seconds, a fireball, more than 10 meters across, burned above the procession. Under the influence of a revealing mark, the flames split and reformed into letters of living fire in the sky. "We are the people of Rohan." At the sight of the flaming words, the guards at Edoras relaxed, though they kept their positions until given orders from the king. "They mean no harm," Gandalf said quietly, staff in hand. As servant of the secret fire and bearer of Narya, the elven ring of fire, he read much in those flames: hope, rescue, longing, love. Fire repelled darkness. It could not be used by foul powers. A dozen light cavalry suddenly broke from the main column and rode hard toward the city. As the horses galloped, faces grew clear to those watching. "Hyojed, my son!" Theoden, who had seemed distant all day, even after being freed from Saruman's control that morning, finally showed real feeling. It was spring of the Third Age, year 3019. The decayed capital of Rohan, nearly desolate, had a glimmer of hope. In a single day, King Theoden had regained his wits, and the Crown Prince, the second Marshal of Rohan, Hyojed, had returned to the city, along with thousands of Rohirrim. That night, the great hall was bright with torches. The gloom that had sat over Edoras was gone. There were smiles and soft laughter. After greeting old friends, Eno sat alone in a corner and listened as men debated plans. Unlike the tale he once knew, where Theoden despaired after losing his son, here the king was confident. Everything seemed the same, and yet wholly changed. "Why are you sitting here by yourself?" a clear voice asked at his shoulder. Eno turned. Golden hair framed a beautiful, resolute face. "My name is Eowyn, King Theoden's niece," she said. Whether from arrangements for the accompanying women and children, or from overhearing earlier, she already knew the story. A single stranger had come into Rohan from the west, crossed half the plains in 6 months, and in that time had destroyed countless dark minions and rescued thousands of Rohirrim, among them her cousin Heojed. More than 5,000 people, without supplies, had been brought safely to Edoras. The feat matched every romantic tale she had ever imagined. But now, the hero sat alone in a corner. Eowyn's curiosity and admiration showed on her face. Ino, hearing her name and noting her reputation, the female shield maiden who was as capable as any man, gave a small, wry smile. "I'm only a passerby. It wouldn't be proper for me to take part in the council that decides Rohan's fate. Besides, I have known your uncle Theoden for 50 years. I would be foolish to try to sway him." 50 years. Eowyn's eyes widened. She had guessed him no older than herself. "Yes, 50 years. Ino nodded. "I am a painter. I painted Theoden once. If you like, I can paint you as well. 1 gold coin. Time slipped by in easy conversation. They were joking about a young king who had once stolen a cream toffee when a familiar voice rang across the hall. "I didn't steal your candy. I wrote an IOU. For that, I waited 50 whole years." Ino turned to find Theoden standing nearby, flanked by Gandalf and Legolas. "Have you finished your talk?" the king asked. "We have," Theoden answered lightly. "We depart tomorrow for Helm's Deep. Better to hold a fortress than suffer needless sacrifice upon the plains." Ino agreed. The Rohirrim were unmatched on the open grass, but there was no point throwing away lives when the people could be sheltered behind walls. Gandalf stepped forward. "In 100 years, your growth astonishes me, and your deeds astonish me more. Thank you for what you have done for Middle-earth." "You flatter me," Ino said. "I only did what my heart told me." He looked at Gandalf with a calm, appraising gaze. In the past, the wizard had seemed simply an old man in a gray robe. Now in the white, he seemed to glow faintly. The light was bright, but not unbearable. Respecting the man's privacy, Ino shifted his sight to the elf prince at Gandalf's side. Eowyn watched all of them with eager eyes. 50 years had seemed long to her. Who would have imagined this story reaching back 100? Night passed peacefully. At dawn, the bells of Edoras rang, not in alarm now, but as a summons. The city's people packed up and filed out with quiet determination. They all knew their destination: Helm's Deep, Rohan's last fortress. 500 riders under Heojed left first as scouts to clear the road. Others followed. Ino flew along on his broom. This march would not be easy, and Saruman's forces, especially warg riders, might yet lie in wait. As he rode, Ino's mind drifted to the small useful facts learned long ago. Gamp's law of elemental transfiguration, fundamental to transfiguration, allowed a wizard to transform objects or create some things. But there were exceptions. Food, the foremost of the 5 exceptions, could not be conjured from nothing. You could transform or multiply food you already had, or summon it from where it existed, but you could not simply create a delicious meal out of thin air. It was a practical lesson to carry on a hard journey. 252. Burning flames, crushing bones and raising ashes across the vast Rohan plains. 500 fully armed cavalry thundered over the grass. Each man carried not only a spear, but also flails and a bow with a quiver of arrows. The bows made full use of the cavalry's mobility. Hooves pounded the earth. Dust rose in great clouds. After about half an hour of riding, the troops scattered. The 500 men, following orders, split into 5 100-man squadrons and fanned out to scout in all directions. As commander, Heojed knew the danger of dividing their strength. Cavalry's greatest power lay in massed charges. Dispersed, the few men left could be defeated in detail. But there was no choice. Their duty was to clear the way and remove obstacles for the tens of thousands of Rohan refugees behind them. Once glorious Rohan, prosperous Edoras, now a 500-man cavalry was all they could spare. Heojed's scout squad rode the plains in peace for most of the morning until a short, urgent blast of horn broke the quiet. "Prepare to fight," he ordered. At that sharp command, the men tightened their ranks and urged their horses forward, ready to charge. A few mournful howls cut the moment short, and the formation threatened to fall apart. "Wolf riders, everyone switch to bows." Heojed's voice was decisive. He had seen this unit at the Eisen. Giant wolves borne by orc riders, wargs, were a different breed of enemy. In small skirmishes, a cavalry charge might win, but only with terrible cost. He'd learned that lesson the hard way. The men scrambled to string their bows and raise their shields. Dark shapes spilled into view, twisted-faced orcs mounted on wargs over 2 meters long. From a distance, they looked merely large, but as they closed the gap, many Rohirrim felt a stab of panic. The beasts' blood-red eyes, bulk, and shaggy hides made the soldiers doubt their weapons. Could their arrows pierce such thick hides? And the enemy's numbers looked like 200 or 300. "Don't panic. Aim for the eyes," Heojed snapped. 2 volleys, then pull back. Play for endurance. Wargs can't outrun warhorses over long distances. The advice came from bitter experience at the Eisen. The wargs thundered forward, closing the distance. Just as the archers were about to loose their arrows, a scorching wall of flame shot up before them. The fire licked across the plain as if with intent, and within heartbeats it encircled the wolf riders. Screams and the crackle of burning leather and fur rose from the blaze. High above, Eno slowly lowered his staff. For other foes, even a dark wizard, he might not have used fire. But for orcs, whether it would be Sectum Sempra or the Killing Curse, fire felt right. 6 months of travel had shown him too many scenes that were little different from purgatory. Reducing these pests to ash was, to his mind, the best justice. A painless death was a mercy he didn't intend to grant them. When the wails subsided, he dispelled the spell, gave a curt nod toward Hyojed on the ground, and spurred his broomstick away. This wave was not the first. He had cut down 3 before, and it would not be the last. Saruman's forces mass-produced such units. As long as the enemy had time and industry, there would be more. Thinking that, Eno streaked off across the sky like an arrow. On the ground, the Rohirrim stood stunned, staring at the charred corpses. A young soldier craned his neck and asked his commander, "Your Highness, did he just pass through like that?" "Not at first," Heojid said, and a half-smile softened his features. "He always claims to be a painter, a bard, but I think he's Rohan's hero." At the word hero, something in Heojed shifted, from wistful sorrow to genuine respect. A true legend. He drove back the darkness with fire, drove off the shadow over Rohan. Helm's Deep, Rohan's last fortress, sat north of the White Mountains in a valley of southern Westfold. A narrow approach opened into a broad rear, flanked by cliffs, and behind the walls lay the deep, natural caves of the Glittering Caves, vast caverns useful for sheltering non-combatants and storing supplies. On the 4th day after leaving Edoras, the whole company reached the fortress. Notably, after the 2nd day, no further harrying orcs had appeared along the route. Perhaps Saruman had decided not to throw more fodder at them. Whether he spared them out of calculation or fatigue, Eno cared little. He thought of himself as a dying man. Even if Saruman was a Maiar, without a patron, he was little more than a powerful thing with limited reach. Standing on the granite-stacked battlements, he felt the sharp truth that Middle-earth was a world of backers and bloodlines. Smaug had died, and that had been the end of him. The Balrog had gone down cleanly. But Gandalf, his death had been a promotion, not a finality. Other deaths were deaths. His had been a rite of advancement. A familiar voice came from behind. "What are you thinking about?" Theoden, making his rounds of the defenses, had spotted his old friend on the wall. Eno turned slowly. "I was thinking," he said, "that after this is over, you should probably pay me back." Theoden, who had been tempered by many storms, laughed. "That is a given, and I'll have you paint Hyojed, but he'll have to pay for it himself." "Hyojed?" Eno shook his head. "He doesn't strike me as very clever, more reckless than you." He thought back to their first meeting at the Isen. The young prince had led dozens of knights in a headlong charge into an orc formation 1,000 strong to cover the retreat of his men. As a warrior, he was unquestionably brave. As a commander, he had shown competence. But as the sole heir of Rohan, Hyojid's courage verged on recklessness. Helm's Deep. Though called a fortress, it was really 2 things: a deep defensive wall running east along the cliffs of the White Mountains, and a semicircular, towering castle built on the western rock, the Hornburg. Eno and Theoden stood side by side on the broad, solid wall. Below them lay the valley floor and the plain at its mouth. The sky above was leaden and low. Will they really attack straight on? Theoden's voice wavered. As king of the Rohirrim, he knew the strength of Helm's Deep and doubted a frontal assault was wise. Or are you afraid they might go around us? Eno knew why Theoden was uneasy. If the Uruk-hai bypassed Helm's Deep and swept through Rohan, everything would snowball, Rohan would fall, and the enemy would spread unchecked. I'm worried, he admitted. What if they skirt the deep and strike across the moors of the Mark, or push straight for Gondor? Theoden stared toward the distant gloom. For days the sun had been hidden, cloud or rain most of the time, and his worries multiplied. Don't worry, my scouts report a large force coming directly for Helm's Deep, Eno said with quiet confidence. Before leaving Edoras, he had asked Fide to patrol Rohan, and when the Uruk-hai were found, the Phoenix had shadowed them from above, tracking their movements. Have you sealed the drainage tunnel? That's the Deep's weakest point, Theoden asked. Eno had warned him. It was blocked this morning, piled with smoothed stones. Even if they tried to clear it, it would take them half a day. Theoden's look lingered on the lower wall. At first, he had not taken the story of the drainage tunnel seriously. Who could crawl through such a hole, and it had been covered with an iron grate? But then he had seen what a wizard could do. When Saruman casually blasted a great rock aside, Theoden understood. Saruman was a wielder of power and the head of the White Council. Such things were not beyond him. For a while, the two men stood in silence, watching the plain. Finally, Theoden broke the quiet. Why are you helping us so much? Truly, Rohan has little to offer. He sounded uncomfortably, almost painfully, unsure. Rohan was no Gondor or Lonely Mountain or Rivendell. Theoden knew his people's poverty better than anyone. Eno did not answer hastily. He thought back. 100 years, the wars of the 5 armies, the choices he had made, magic, power, old friendships, promises left to fulfill for Lena. None of those reasons felt enough. He looked again toward the Hornburg and at the men assembling under Theoden's orders. Even boys barely 10 had been pressed into mail and helmets. Many of the younger ones were not even as tall as the battlements. I'm not doing this for reward, Eno said finally. Not for race, not for profit. I'm simply following my heart. Night fell like a heavy curtain. Clouds hid the moon, and the stars were thin and pale. Along the walls of Helm's Deep, torches flared, light enough to show the faces of the defenders and steadiness enough to comfort them. At Elrond's command, 200 elves had come as promised, and their arrival lifted Rohirrim's spirits. Middle-earth had not forgotten them. Yet even with those 200, the defenders numbered barely 800 against 10,000, or more, Uruk-hai. More than the size of the enemy, Eno feared Saruman's interference. A fallen Maya would be unlikely to hesitate to use great power. Then, in the tense hush, someone whispered, "They're here." Eno glanced at Haldir, the elven commander at his side. He had refused to join Theoden up on the Hornburg and had chosen instead to hold the deep wall with the elves. From the dark line of the distant plain, there rose a low, mounting roar as the Uruk-hai surged forward like the tide. Their torches jittered and spread. The valley was full of scattered points of flame. Saruman had equipped them well, heavy armor, disciplined ranks. Their marching made the earth beneath the valley thrum. Between the mountain walls, their stamping multiplied and rang out like thunder. On the battlements, the Rohirrim and elves snapped to readiness. Eno stepped back into shadow and drew the boggart from himself. Ink-black smoke unfurled from his silhouette and, under cover of the night, drifted and seeped across the plain toward the oncoming host. For large battles, the boggart's area of fear was devastating. As the smoke flowed, the Uruk-hai's steady beat broke. Their marching, at first perfectly rhythmic, slid into chaos. Fear had crept into the ranks. The formation did not collapse. Perhaps the effect was diluted at such scale, but the cadence and therefore the enemy's morale were affected. That was enough. In a fight of blades and shields, morale decided much. The marching beat mattered far more to the Rohirrim than to the elves. A disruption of the enemy's confidence could yield decisive advantage. Satisfied, Eno raised his wand toward the clouded sky and shouted, "Expecto Patronum." 254. Patronus Charm's Morale Boost. The ancient white Patronus charm from the world of magic was about to appear in Middle-earth for the first time. Under the night sky, the stars seemed to shine a touch brighter, as if answering something. As the incantation left his lips, the tip of the wand flared with a brilliant light, and a silver beam shot upward. Countless motes of silver mist gathered, instantly illuminating the sky above Helm's Deep. A sacred aura rose, soft and undeniable. Bathed in that light, elves on the battlements and Rohirrim and Hornburg alike felt a warmth and a surge of strength, a faint thrill like the joy of harvest. They were not alone anymore. Facing the Uruk-hai, their fear thinned. In Helm's Deep, the morale of the allied elves and men shifted like a tide. The silver cloud above them changed too. Under the stars, something moved within the mist, an outline forming and stirring in the light. A horn sounded. In the original telling, the Horn of Helm rang at dawn of the 5th day. Here its melodious note rolled through the valley, and the courage of Middle-earth's men rose in answer. For glory, for the people, sons of Rohan, counterattack. Theoden drew his sword and stood on the ramparts of Hornburg, crying the cry of a king. The Rohirrim might lack Númenórean blood, the longevity of the Dunedain, or the great craft of the elves, but as the purest of men in Middle-earth, they were stubbornly loyal and unyielding. No matter the enemy, they charged on horseback without hesitation. The battle began. The first to respond were the elven archers on the wall. They drew and loosed with perfect synchronicity, each volley felling more than 200 Uruk-hai. The men inside Hornburg were equally determined. Shafts rained down. Perhaps Saruman had truly favored such breed, for even under the pressure of fear, the Uruk-hai kept coming, unflinching. Countless arrows and falling bodies marked their advance. After thousands died, the Uruk-hai reached the wall and set about siege work. Thick grappling hooks crashed into the parapet and were secured. Using pulleys, the orcs hauled up ropes and raised a dozen tall siege ladders. The heavy wooden ladders, pulled by numbers of Uruk-hai, began to rise. Then, sectum sempra. The curse struck like an invisible blade through the ropes holding the 12 ladders. The ropes snapped. The great ladders, crafted from heavy trunks, toppled like drunken giants and crashed back down onto the charging Uruk-hai. In an instant, the attackers' momentum shattered. Ino stood on the battlement with his wand still warm in his hand. He did not waste time chasing every scattered Uruk-hai. Having lost their ladders and with the culvert blocked, the orcs were little more than targets. What worried him more was Saruman himself. Was the wizard's power somehow restrained, or was he being delayed by some unforeseen force? It was a thought rooted in the tale. Facing the Ent attack from Fangorn, Saruman sat inert atop Orthanc, while floods and trees ravaged his works, and Ino could not dismiss the possibility. Still, Ino knew that if he unleashed his full power, he could level the whole of Helm's Deep as easily as a curtain. Restraint was necessary. So he intervened sparingly, severing ropes, frosting the slope leading to Hornburg, and then, for mischief and effect, conjuring butter atop the ice to make the approach treacherous. That, and little else. He would not let the battle draw him in. The fight pressed on through the night. The elves maintained their steady rhythm, their volleys never slackened. The Rohirrim on the wall grew weary. Human strength has its limits, and many arms trembled from bow-drawing, fingers failing to hold their longbows steady. But there were other weapons, javelins, hand-axes, flails, stones. Hornburg began to hurl everything it could. The tone of the battle shifted from a single-minded siege to a brutal, desperate defense. Gimli felt the strain more than most. Short as the ramparts were, he had to leap to see over them, and he grumbled at Legolas's teasing. When they come up, I'll show them a dwarf's axe. I can face 10 of them in a fair fight, unlike some long-ears who hide and shoot. But you haven't killed a single one yet, Legolas replied, hitting his friend's sore spot with a grin. Ah, roared Gimli. He undid the axe from his back and hurled it at the nearest Uruk-hai. The weight carried it far. It struck true. Oh ho, you've killed one now. I take back what I said, Legolas teased, finishing another precise shot. But only one. The clash ran from night into dawn. Nearly all the Uruk-hai outside Helm's Deep were dead or broken. One had to admire Saruman in a grim way. The Uruk-hai were the Dark World's truest, most single-minded warriors, bred for that suicidal tenacity alone. Light finally crested the valley, and it revealed the Patronus gathered above. Ino felt it, a presence, and looked up. From the silver-white haze, a shape swam into clearer view. At the same time, the black miasma that had smothered the valley all night began to wash back like a receding tide. The creature of fear reacted at once. The pitch-black curtain that had swallowed light and chilled blood thinned and was drawn back. Shadows retreated as if returning to their nests. When, on the eastern slope, a white-robed knight now stepped forward, it was as if nothing unnatural had happened at all. 255. Unexpected Gains, Helm's Deep. The valley that had once belonged to Rohan's kings lay now strewn with the corpses of Uruk-hai. When Eomer arrived with 2,000 Rohan elites, he too was struck by the sight. Under the defensive wall and the Hornburg, bodies piled up like low mountains, in places nearly as tall as the walls themselves. Their will to fight had been terrifying. Even Rohan's finest would have struggled to match that relentlessness. The Uruk-hai seemed unable to rest, to retreat. They had fought on until the last fell. On the plains beyond the valley, Gandalf halted and turned. Seeing the pallor of shock on the riders' faces, he knew he must speak. Otherwise, this elite cavalry would fear such foes in any future battle. Eomer, this is Saruman's evil work, he said, raising his staff. On the Uruk-hai chest plates, a white hand had been painted. Saruman poured power into them. He has given them no fear of sunlight and has bewitched their minds, made them into killing machines. But fortunately, his power is limited. We shall not see the like of this again. Eomer relaxed at that, for a cavalry force's greatest enemy is an opponent that will not break. A halted charge is a disaster. These were exactly the kind of foes cavalry dread. A long, melodious horn sounded from Fangorn. The Ents, who had slumbered for ages, woke at the call and surged from the outer reaches of the broken woods. The forest itself seemed to roar. Countless treebeards, towering behemoths, slow but covering ground with each ponderous step, roused and advanced toward Isengard. Saruman had felt that anger stir the moment the horn blew, but the White Wizard was weakened. His power had been spread thin. Each Uruk-hai took only a sliver of it, but thousands of slivers added up. Against the awakened wood, Saruman could do little. Across the vast plains of Rohan, after the main force of Uruk-hai was cleared, Theoden ordered a return to Edoras. A parade of people stretched as far as the eye could see. The capital could not be neglected. Its banner flying was not only a matter of honor, but a symbol. As long as Edoras stood, their lands would not be taken. Where faces had been somber on the march out, now every rider and marcher glowed with relief. Children and old women, who understood little of war, nevertheless felt what all of them felt. The war was over. The shadow lifted. Eno chose not to ride his conspicuous flying broom for the return, but a Rohan warhorse, keeping a quiet place among the ranks. With Eomer and his 2,000 elites leading the escort, there was no need to fear. Even if another 10,000 Uruk-hai had appeared, the riders could have met them. The pace was easy, the horses steady, but the journey held its small moments of irritation and small comforts. So that white light, is it a power of belief? Eowyn asked, riding a brown warhorse at his side, eyes bright and expectant. Eno pretended not to hear her and turned his head. Heojid came into view, a boy who had been chattering constantly since they left the valley. Eowyn did most of the talking. Heojid listened with eager curiosity. He also had an uncomplicated way of being placated. "Would you like some candy?" Eno asked, producing 2 butter toffees and offering one to the Rohan prince and one to the princess. Hyojed, who seemed to have inherited his father's fondness for sweets, took his at once with a delighted grin. Eowyn, however, still had questions. She refused the candy and kept her face intent and curious. "In that case," Eno said, "what if I give you a weapon? One with a bit of magic?" He remembered the one-handed sword that old bands had given him when he had ordered musical instruments, a small free gift that nonetheless outmatched the common weapons of men in Middle-earth for toughness and edge. Eowyn's face lit up. "Yes," she said, and then, lowering her head a little, added, "Thank you." Hyojid glanced from them to the candy in his hand and felt it suddenly lost its appeal. Who could have guessed that refusing a sweet might win you a sword? But he had already eaten his. He could not now go back on it. Eno laughed and put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Don't worry, you'll get one too." They rode on. The journey home was swift. 2.5 days later, they were back in Edoras. The city, set against the White Mountains, looked older and more battered than before, but the return filled every heart with honest joy. the joy of having survived, and the plainest human desire of war, to live. As the riders moved through the streets, feeling of the city coalesced into a single thought for many: to be safe, to be at peace. Eno did not use magic, yet, as if from that common hope, a faint flame sprang up before his eyes like an invisible match struck. At the head of the procession, Gandalf, newly named White Wizard, seemed to sense the same spark. He turned, and, though the distance stretched between them, his gaze fell across the crowd as though he saw straight to where Eno stood. After a long instant, he let his look slip away, raised the staff in his right hand, and a ring set with a red gem at his fingers flashed. Night in Edoras was unusually quiet. After the war, the people basked in a hard-won peace. Under the stars, the city slept, but the quiet was not empty. It was like a seed soaked and waiting, unremarkable now, but certain to break ground in spring. Near the center of town, on a slope not far from the council hall, a room of extreme simplicity held a few pieces of furniture like those of a plain medieval household: a straw-covered bed, a rough wooden table, a bench. On the table, an old bronze oil lamp burned, its warm flame alive and gently flickering in the dim night. 256. The Power of Vitality. The room smelled faintly of oil and old straw. Eno leaned against the narrow bed, the lamp on the table burning quietly, its flame trembling with the wick. A ceramic teapot and matching cup hovered beside the bed, as if on invisible strings. Though no fire warmed it, steam still rose from the spout, carrying a thin ribbon of tea scent through the air. The spare furnishings, the lamp, the hovering teapot, everything gave the place a calm, lived-in feeling, as if for a while one could forget the noise and worry of the world outside. The harvest after Helm's Deep had surprised him, even if it had been unintended. The change in the boggart was obvious. The plains beyond the valley still lay under a pall of smoke from over 10,000 people, and by dawn that black haze had thickened into a near canopy. The flame and the Patronus charm had changed too. On the road back, the simple, concentrated emotions of the Rohan survivors, the relief, the fear turned into gratitude, had altered the flame. Instead of the icy, bitter light it had taken on when Fide was born, this lamp's flame now seemed charged with something else: redemption, hope, the pulse of life itself. Eno knew that feeling. It reminded him of the time before Fide's birth, when the flame had absorbed the resentment and curses of the dance of delicate snow and first showed signs of life. This new change wasn't what he had expected, but it made sense. More than half of those 10,000 Rohan had been people he'd helped across the plains. They had suffered. Because of that suffering, they clung all the more to the peace they'd won. Their shared yearning for safety and a quiet life had concentrated into the flame, and like kindling meeting the right heat, it had ignited on its own. He hadn't anticipated any of it, hadn't even thought it possible. But it had happened, quietly and naturally, as if by agreement. Eno sat up slowly. The teapot poured itself a cup of hot tea and set it before him. He drank, then turned his gaze to the lamp. Where Fide's birth had produced a distinct azure flame that seethed with destruction, this tiny flame, no higher than an inch, burned warm and steady inside the bronze lamp, like a small heart finding its place. When it had first appeared on the road, it seemed almost insignificant. But to him it contained an immense feeling, not the exhilaration he'd felt the first time he cast the Patronus, but a deeper, more life-affirming power. It was the people's longing for peace, their desire for ordinary days, and more broadly, the force of life itself. Birth, sprouting seeds, everything that describes living things, lived in that little flame. Two extremes, he murmured. Fide has a companion now. Fide had gathered despair and destruction. This new flame condensed hope and vitality. Dawn came like silk across the sky on the second morning. Edoras, ancient capital of Rohan, felt like an old tree that had pushed out new shoots after a long winter. After a night of rest, the city stirred. People who could work and rebuild went to their tasks, while the weak and the bereaved still waited for shelter and food. In his room, Eno listened to the rising and falling noise outside, washed quickly, and set about preparing a simple breakfast. If Rohan had been in better order, he would have been pickier about the meager things in his pack, but there was no market here yet, no completed housing. The 5,000 or so elderly, infirm, women, and children who remained needed care. Their homes were gone, and to send them back now would be murder. On the table he laid out sliced ham, a wedge of cheese, and a pot of strong black tea. He had barely set things when a polite knock came at the door. He rose and opened it. Gandalf stood there in a white cloak, smiling. "Good morning," he said. "I hope I haven't disturbed you." "In light of the morning, no disturbance at all," Eno answered, stepping aside. "Please come in." Gandalf settled on the long bench with an oddly downcast look. "I'm sorry to call so early," he said. "I really had nowhere else to go. If you'll have me, I can help where I'm needed." "If you have nowhere else, come work here," Gandalf went on. "In a couple of days I plan to set up a stall in Edoras. Come help me. I'll pay you." Eno smiled politely. He accepted the invitation in words. That would be an honor, but inwardly he distrusted the idea. He used the exchange as a polite way to limit the visit. He preferred to keep his distance from this Maya. As his own power had grown, and he'd looked back over recent events, a dawning clarity had settled on him. 100 years earlier at Bjorn's farm, he'd used polyjuice to pass for an adult. In retrospect, that disguise had probably been obvious long before. Old bands of Hogsmeade had noticed something amiss, so there was no reason Gandalf couldn't have seen through it as well. And yet, Gandalf had not only aided the party through Mirkwood, but had even intended to give a child a sword that would slay foes. Give a weapon to someone too small to even hold it properly? These inconsistencies had made Eno wary. Gandalf was, strictly speaking, a good and great being, but that very greatness was frightening. Unlike Dumbledore's sacrificial tenderness, Gandalf worked for the larger strategy, often indifferent to individual suffering. Eno thought of Muggle role-playing games where the player's avatar is destined to kill the Demon King. The hero always thinks about the grand quest, not the villagers who suffer along the way. Gandalf's choices had the same weight. Even after Rohan had been shattered and barely able to stand, he still urged them to send aid to Gondor, lighting the beacon of Minas Tirith himself. In one telling version, it's stirring, a symbol of hope. From another angle, it was a demand placed on Theoden: refuse to help and be branded a traitor. Send troops and bleed Rohan dry. The so-called greater good rarely accounted for how many Rohirrim might not make it home after such a decision. No one paused to measure the cost to the ordinary people. Eno finished his tea in silence, feeling the small flame's warmth and the weight of the world outside the room's thin walls. He would keep his distance, for now, and watch how the living flame and the living people of Rohan mended themselves, one fragile day at a time. 257. Gandalf's Visit. The small room fell silent. Eno looked through the open door at the bustling street beyond. Outside, the people of Rohan were busy. Young men carried distributed food, young women bore bamboo baskets brimming with vegetables, and the elderly and children did whatever they could. The view outside the door was Edoras, a vivid picture of everyday life among the Rohirrim. Inside, Gandalf's pure white robes shone so brightly they made Eno squint. "I'm going to set up my stall now. Want to come? Otherwise, you can have breakfast here." "Don't worry, I haven't touched any of it," Gandalf offered. Eno picked up his suitcase and walked out. Edoras was a hill city too, but compared with the Holy White City, it felt less solemn and rigid, freer and more peaceful. Except for the High Council Hall at the center, the city had few restrictions. People wandered the streets without the strict inner and outer city distinctions of Minas Tirith. Eno walked slowly along the bluestone path, receiving countless respectful glances. The Rohirrim did not make a show of thanks with words or touch. They simply conveyed it with their eyes. Beneath his feet, the bluestone still held last night's dew, reflecting the faint light of dawn like a silver ribbon winding forward. He chose a relatively quiet corner, opened his suitcase, and spread a thick linen cloth on the ground. One by one, he laid out small novel items: pretty Christmas hats, pure wool knitted socks and scarves, a pair of second-hand dragonhide gloves, exquisitely woven straw rings, and unused potion glass bottles. As the goods accumulated, the little stall no longer looked shabby. When he was finished, Eno sat down on the ground rather than conjuring the small stool he often made with transfiguration. At the council hall in Edoras, Gandalf pressed the matter with urgency while King Theoden hesitated. Theoden felt a deep attachment to Gondor. He had been born in the White City and spent a happy childhood there, returning to Rohan only as an adult to take the throne. On a personal level, he was unwilling to see Minas Tirith fall. But Rohan's strength was stretched thin, and another expedition seemed more than the kingdom could bear. Silence settled over the council chamber. Gandalf, noting Theoden's doubts, continued, "My friend, Sauron will show no mercy. He will not stop his slaughter once Gondor is destroyed. All we can do is resist. Let everyone take up arms." "Aid Gondor? Ha!" The Crown Prince Heojed snapped, merciless. "Where was Gondor when Rohan was attacked? Where were the reinforcements? I only saw 200 elves from Lothlorien at Helm's Deep." Gandalf let the prince's words pass and turned back to Theoden. "Rohan's former king swore allegiance to Isildur at the Stone of Erech, promising that Rohan would come to Gondor's aid when she was in need." Theoden's face grew cold. He was not only a ruler, but a father with a son to consider, yet an ancient alliance could not simply be ignored. The idea that a promise from 3,000 years ago should bind them now surprised him, but an oath was an oath. Rohan could hardly afford to break it openly. "Then let the steward of Gondor light the beacons," Theoden said, his voice stiff. "Only when the beacons of aid are seen will Rohan dispatch troops. I will personally lead the Rohirrim cavalry to fulfill the old oath." Gandalf mounted Shadowfax, the king of horses, and departed Edoras before dusk. At dusk, Eno began to pack up his stall as well. Half a day of trading had given him a long-forgotten kind of joy. Street vending was a simplification. It felt more like running a temporary trading post. With the war ended and industry yet to revive, coin was scarce. Barter had returned. Often someone would trade a wooden basin for a pair of socks, and then that basin would be taken by someone else the next second. Gradually, everyone started exchanging things spontaneously, and customers thinned out. Not everything vanished, though. Children still admired the glass bottles and the elaborate hats. Seeing their longing, Eno was generous. He told them to collect pebbles. 3 pretty pebbles could buy a glass bottle, 15 a Christmas hat. If there weren't enough hats, transfiguration could make up the difference. He had learned the practice in English orphanages. "Nothing is ever free. You can only get what you want with your own hands," the old matron used to say, and Eno agreed. For children with families, gifts are pleasant. For orphans, however, getting used to receiving without effort can ruin them. No one will hand them things once they leave the orphanage. Teaching them to earn what they want was helping them grow. Many of the children in Rohan who gathered at his stall were orphans he'd rescued on his travels. Dusk settled. Eno returned to the small house he had left that morning, carrying his suitcase in his left hand and a large linen-wrapped bag of pebbles in his right. He had no intention of discarding those pebbles. He respected everyone's effort, however small. He pushed the door open and found guests inside, 3 young people of almost the same age. Heojed looked annoyed. Opposite him sat the siblings Eowyn and Eomer. "Ah, my little room is almost as busy as the council hall," Eno said with a playful grin. He was joking, but not entirely. The Crown Prince Heojed, the second Marshal Eowyn, Eomer, the third Marshal and Captain of the Royal Guard. These 3, in one way or another, could shape the fate of Middle-earth for the next 20 years. Xiaodi's magical creatures share for today. Winged horse. British Ministry of Magic classification level, XXXX. Origin and distribution. Winged horses exist all over the world. Appearance. There are many breeds of winged horse, including Abraxan, Ethenan, Granian, and the rare Thestral. Related knowledge. Like hippogriffs, owners of winged horses are required to cast a disillusionment charm on them periodically to avoid detection by muggles. They were in a simple, unadorned room. When Eno finished speaking, Heojed was the first to rise. "You're back," he said. "We didn't mean to come in, but the door was open when we arrived." A flicker of restraint crossed the young Rohan prince's face. "Relax, my friend," Eno replied with a smile and stepped into the room. He set a large linen-wrapped bundle of stones in the corner. The stones made a crisp sound as they hit the floor. Eowyn glanced over with curiosity. "What are those? Stones?" "Yes," Eno said, "stones, and the result of a lot of people's effort." He waved his wand. The ceramic teapot on the table stirred to life, and 1 teacup split neatly into 3. The teapot poured water into each cup. Eowyn looked from the teacups to the pile of stones. "Very thoughtful," she said. "I heard about this earlier today. I'm sorry, I haven't anything proper to offer in return. No, Eno interrupted. These two things are different. The weapon I gave you was a gift from me. The children's little hats were something they asked for of their own accord. You mustn't judge the worth of a thing by its price. He let the point hang a moment, then moved on. Knowing he would be leaving Middle-earth again, he wanted to leave them with a lesson. Rohan had never been short on brave riders, he thought, but it had long lacked wise leadership. Like aiding Gondor? Hyojed asked, thoughtful. Rohan paid a heavy cost, but the motive was to uphold an ancient oath. Theoretically, yes, Eno nodded, then changed the subject. Let me tell you a story about a charcoal seller. The tale, new to most of them, was simple and unadorned. It wasn't dramatic, but it sketched with some force the hardship of ordinary life, how a casual decision by those in power could send ripples that altered countless lives. Thin linen, feet in straw sandals, chilblains on his toes, yet the old man still muttered that it wasn't cold enough. The story was short. Eno had pared and reshaped it. 5 minutes later, he was done. That's why I'm against aiding Gondor, Hyojed said at once. From the Isen to the west, he had seen 6 months' worth of sorrow, the bitter cost borne by Rohan's people. Eomer, who had been silent, sighed. Theoden's nephew and commander of the royal guard explained the other side. We cannot be known as traitors. Everyone will shun us. Trade will be cut off, and if the dark forces take Gondor, war will spill upon us anyway. Many have alliances with Gondor, the dwarves of the Lonely Mountain, the elves of Rivendell, even the Sindar of Lothlorien. Eomer went on. Hyojed countered sharply. Yes, but must Rohan alone be afraid? If we are to die, let us die together. Shall the lives of my people be spent to buy peace for others? Eowyn felt a sudden sadness. The argument she least wanted to see was unfolding. One brother against another, cousins divided by politics. Rationally, she sympathized with Hyojed. Gondor was no holy city, but it was vast. Even if Mordor's legions rolled through, it would take years to break it in. In those years, with the southern borders, Ered Nimrais and the Moria Creeks, held, Rohan might recover. The riders of the Mark could still ride free across the plains. Yet she also understood the pull of oaths and alliances. Eno listened without committing. You don't need to argue over what is already decided, he said finally. I understand Theoden. His choice will not be changed by the two of you. Instead of wasting breath, figure out how you will meet it. He rose and crossed to a nearby trunk. A moment later, he set an exquisite single-handed sword on the table, an alchemical weapon from old bands. Though presented as a gift, it bore enchantment, strong, keen, and finely balanced. This is what I promised, he said. For Rohan's shield maiden. 3 days after the Battle of Helm's Deep, in Edoras, a new smithy opened. It was unlike any other, a vast workshop tended by a single hand from start to finish. Flames were kindled by sorcery, hammers rose and fell as if guided by invisible arms, sword blanks turned themselves on the anvil. After giving Eowyn the alchemical blade, Eno had promised Hyojed something as well, and he wanted to do more than keep his word. He wanted to set the wheels of recovery turning. He would not forge many alchemical weapons in a short time, but ordinary arms could be produced in quantity, and a magical duplication spell could multiply supplies. The duplicates would not last forever, perhaps only a year and a half, but in the arc of the coming days that would be enough. When those items wore away, Middle-earth would be entering a new age, the Fourth Age, an era of human self-rule. Inside the smithy, a new spear lay cooling on the forge. Longswords, hand axes, flails, spears, longbows, round shields, and hauberks were arrayed on racks. Ordinary by name, each piece had been refined by magic until its quality rivaled dwarven work. When the first samples were finished, Eno casually snuffed the flames and looked up at a corner of the ceiling. If you don't need them, I'll send these fellows to the front, he said. From a blue, web-like shimmer in the ceiling came a voice. What makes you think I require the protection of those insects? A halo of blue light washed the room. A tall figure stepped forward, familiar in face and bearing. After many years, the White Witch had reappeared, no longer all chilling majesty, but with a softness and relief in her expression. Eno stared. She had truly reversed her form. When he had confined her to the restricted section, he had half thought she might seek to regain herself. But he had not expected her to do it within a single year. In the blacksmith's shop, among racks of weapons and piles of fresh forged gear, the White Witch's sudden arrival turned an ordinary workroom into something extraordinary. People say fine clothes and jewels can enhance a person's appearance, but some people are so striking they seem to decorate the world around them. The White Witch was one of those people. Her height alone drew the eye, accentuated by crystal high heels, at least 3 inches, that made her look even taller and more slender. A pale blue evening gown fell around her. Her skin was white and luminous as porcelain. Against the dark, metallic backdrop of newly forged blades and armor, she looked like a fragile, impossible thing set among hard, practical objects. "Do I look surprised?" she teased. "In a way, yes," Eno admitted. The transformation of magical creatures into human form was unprecedented. Before him stood something nobody had done before. Another voice answered from above. From strands of blue spider silk on the ceiling, a small figure dropped down. "Are you still surprised?" Lena asked. Eno glanced from the White Witch up to Lena, perched on the ceiling for a long beat, at a loss for words. Memories stirred. Of the notebook the witch had given him, the Gaunt family's legacy notes, the passages about tattooing one's body with runes and using the self as alchemical material to gain power. "You remember," the White Witch said, "but you never studied it properly." She moved toward the wall with soft, deliberate steps. Her skirt rippled like a wave as she walked. Lena hopped down and landed lightly on the witch's shoulder. The pair made an oddly beautiful tableau, silk and frost atop steel and coal. Eno's breath caught. If etiquette allowed, he would have examined her closely. It felt like seeing a miracle. The White Witch extended her hand. At first her palm looked like smooth, fair skin. Then, as she opened it, the skin receded to reveal crystalline details. A pattern of ice flower petals and intricate alchemical circuitry embedded beneath, glinting like carved ice. "I had you read that notebook because I wanted you to understand the properties of ice flower magic," she said. Her tone was wry. "And what did you do with it? You made a troll and 5 goblins and put them to farming in the valley." She glanced toward the blacksmith's furnace. The flames had gone out, but the embers still gave off heat. "That was a long time ago," she added softly. "You've forged your own path. There's no need to follow mine." Life went on with the ordinary slowness that makes time slip by unnoticed. The battle at Helm's Deep had been over for more than 2 weeks. Many things had changed in that span. Edoras regained its former life under Eowyn's careful management. The more than 5,000 Rohirrim who had suffered and been displaced were settling into the city and beginning new lives. Hyojed and Eomer, each with well-equipped cavalry, used Edoras as their base and swept the remaining darkness from Rohan to give the people a safer homeland. To Eno, though, these were background shifts. His attention stayed fixed on the Acromantula. Since Lena's arrival, and especially since she left, he'd worked with single-minded focus. The story of Middle-earth was accelerating toward its end, and all he could do was prepare, waiting for the Third Age's last movements to play out. Lena's departure had been less expected in one way. She hadn't gone abroad or to one of the courts. With Fida's help, she had gone to the Shire. "I've been a queen for too long," she'd said. "I want to live under a different name for a while." Eno understood. Even if he had disagreed, he would not have stopped her. He had promised her freedom. When she left, a small, guilty relief uncoiled in him, like the easing of a pressure that had been pressing on him for years. For all that, he judged people by actions, not words. The White Witch's death, the sudden presence of the ice flower, Lena's blue acromantula form. When a string of coincidences keeps appearing, it's necessary to reassess. Are they truly coincidences? He tried not to overthink intentions, but many things fit together in unsettling ways. Lena's warning from last year echoed in his mind, the one about paying attention to the ice flower in the sanctuary. In hindsight, that warning tied a lot of loose ends. The witch truly had left a legacy. The ice flower magic and the bloodline were genuine, but the flower itself had been a contingency, a fake planted as a backup plan. As an experienced transmigrator from Charn to Narnia, the White Witch knew how to smuggle things from world to world. What she hadn't accounted for were the sanctuary's stricter rules. Once the seed left Narnia the first time, the consequences became irreversible. That realization gnawed at Eno. The witch had not spoken with malice, and that made him feel worse. He had accepted her legacy and her bloodline, and yet, through what amounted to outmaneuvering, he had gained the upper hand. It felt a little underhanded. After Lena's appearance, he had tried to treat her with the utmost respect and never forced a thing upon her. As the witch had said, it was all in the past now. After Middle-earth's story ended, perhaps they would meet again, like old acquaintances, once every few decades. Debts of gratitude are the hardest to repay, he murmured. He sighed and returned to his work. Hundreds of acromantula stood before him in rows, each over 3 meters long, each carrying a massive spear across its back. It was relentless, practical labor. What mattered now? Far to the west, in Gondor, a different kind of preparation was underway. On Silent Hill, the first peak west of Minas Tirith, on the eastern edge of the Druadan Forest, Gondor's beacon tower for calling Rohan's aid stood ready. 2 figures, one tall and one small, climbed the treacherous slope, Gandalf and the hobbit Pippin. "I'll draw them away when the time comes," Gandalf said, lowering his voice. "The rest is up to you." "Don't worry, this is nothing," Pippin answered earnestly. An old man's injury and created a commotion to pull the 2 soldiers on duty away from the beacon. While they were distracted, Pippin, nimble and determined, scrambled up the ancient tower of Amon-Dîn. He knocked over the lamp on the firewood. Hot oil and flame spilled down. With a thunderous roar, the dry kindling caught. The beacon of Amon-Dîn flared to life. One by one, the second, the third, the fourth, beacons blazed along the snow-capped line of the White Mountains, and the old oath between Rohan and Gondor, dormant for 3,000 years, was echoed again across the heights. 260, cursed ghost of Mount Erech, the border between Rohan and Gondor. On the western spur of the White Mountains, high above the plains, the last of Gondor's 7 beacon towers, Halifirion, blazed its signal across the night. In Edoras, the gathering bell tolled in the great hall. Theoden, clad in full armor, had stood there for some time. When the council was assembled, he spoke without hesitation. "They have lit the beacon for aid. I will uphold the old oath and lead 5,000 riders of Rohan to reinforce Gondor." He named Éomer as his second in command. "He will march with me. If I fall, Éomer shall assume command of the host." Theoden's eyes swept slowly over the faces before him. Stewards, marshals, lords of the Riddermark. Then he turned to Hyojed. "Lead 1,000 men to remain in Edoras, to guard against any Dunlending counterattack from the west. This is the king's command." This time, Theoden made his choice not from despair and hatred, but with the sober calculation of a ruler who must preserve his people as well as answer the call of an ancient ally. Orders were given, sent out through the ranks, and the men of Rohan prepared. Quietly and steadfastly they packed their saddlebags and bade their families farewell. At the city gate, a broad table had been set, more than 3 meters long, laid with weapons and armor, keen spears, barrels of arrows, interlocking hauberk, round shields, and light helms. Many townsfolk had come to see off kin and friends. They stood in circle, some weeping, some stoic. This was a Rohan custom, one last farewell before the march. As the soldiers filed by the table, they each took what suited them. At Eno's signal, the first man reached out for a piece of armor. Then another and another followed, each selecting what they needed as if by habit. There was a quiet marvel in that scene, a memory of the same miracle 6 months prior when food had been handed out. There were only a few items on the long table, yet no matter how many hands took, the weapons seemed inexhaustible. On the plains, 5,000 well-equipped cavalry thundered south. The number was not enormous, but the mass of horses and riders made the earth tremble and sent up a dust cloud that rolled like a storm. Theoden rode with a plan. Each rider would have 2 mounts so they could press on at hard pace, rest briefly at Moria Creek on the White Mountain's southern edge, and then push straight to Minas Tirith. They meant to ride fast and strike where needed. High above them, Eno rode on his broom. Unlike at Helm's Deep, he intended to fight with all the freedom his human nature and wizardry allowed, bold enough to be effective, not reckless. Middle-earth's present era, he thought, had 2 strands, the overt quests and the hidden ones. Frodo's path to Mount Doom, destroying the One Ring, was the silent, all-consuming line beneath everything. Aragorn's march to the Pelennor and the sacrifice of the host were meant to draw Sauron's eye. Men were not foolish. They knew the stakes and yet marched willingly. Eno, a human wizard rather than a Maya, had liberties the greater powers did not. Under the great music, he meant to do what he could to steer the tide. 2 days of riding day and night brought them to Moria Creek as dusk fell. Scouts reported the approach clear, and Theoden ordered camp. Moria Creek was only half a day's ride from Minas Tirith. The men ate and hobbled horses in the open, the camp noisy with preparations, low conversations, and the restless stamping of mounts. For many of these riders, tomorrow might be their last day. Eno dismounted and alighted on a lone rock, keeping to himself. He took from his pack an old instrument, a Scots accordion he had not played for a long time. It had been the first instrument he owned in the world of magic. He remembered buying it, the small coins old John had given him, the odd trades at Gringotts, the shopkeeper's raised eyebrows. He had used it to comfort himself once, and now at dusk, he drew it out again. This time he played it by hand, without enchantment. The notes that flowed were mournful and plaintive, pipe-like and full of longing. The melody rode on the cool breeze and drifted through the camp. Slowly the noise died away. Men ceased talking, horses stopped pawing, and an attention fell over the riders as if the tune were a summons. In the music, some men saw images, rolling hills, tartan patterns, tiny moss flowers brave against stone, and a whole people bleeding and resisting. The sorrow carried grandeur. It was a song of humankind's yearning for freedom, an epic in minor keys. When the last note faded, Theoden stood at the base of the rock. Éomer and Aragorn were with him, and beside them moved Legolas with his keen, unreadable face. "What is that called?" Theoden asked. "Braveheart," Eno said quietly, setting the instrument down. He looked over the camp at the riders, and something in him settled. He felt he understood, at least a little, the weight of history in which they moved. Time moves like song, generations pass, but the deeds of heroes are sung and remembered. "Every man dies," he added after a moment, thinking of the line the melody echoed, "but not every man really lives." Night deepened, and the camp grew still with the hush of watchfires. Eno felt the change, and he felt something else as well, a bright, eager thrill in his mind. It answered to a voice he knew as Fide. He turned his head and looked south, across the dark sweep of the White Mountains. The old tale stirred in his thoughts, the cursed dead of Erech. He had seen the flash of that army in the earlier telling of events, shadows that appeared and vanished, and the memory of their origin returned. Long ago, the folk of the valleys and caverns, kinsmen of the wild men, had endured long oppression. In the later years of the Second Age, when elves and Númenóreans drove Sauron back, these people had come under the sway of Númenórean rule and sworn an oath upon a black stone to Isildur in Gondor. Over the years, when called upon in time of need, they refused. Dishonor followed. Isildur pronounced a curse upon them at the Black Stone, an ancient judgment that bound them to darkness until their oath was fulfilled. Reduced to a haunted name, they became the Oathbreakers the world feared. Few outside Gondor's oldest halls knew the full story of that oath, 3,000 years of secret shame, but Theoden did know the implications of the beacon. Gondor might be without a king now, but Aemon Dín's signal had been lit, and it was a legitimate call of the realm. The duty of Rohan was old and real. Theoden, standing on the White Mountains, was not the sort to gamble with the future of his people. He could not afford to ignore that reckoning.